Hi everybody, welcome back to another video about philosophy here on the YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us, and been excited about this interview for quite some time. Not only because I have great respect for the guests, but I also am very excited about the topic. I was just telling my guests that the first philosopher I ever became interested in when I was a college student was Friedrich Nietzsche. And that's what we're going to talk about now for about 30 minutes or so, is German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He lived from 1844 to 1900. And my guest is Rob Olson. He is, among many other things, the president of the Dallas Philosophers Forum. Their website is philosophersforum.org. And so, Rob, good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, Dave.
All right. So, Friedrich Nietzsche, is this somebody that you've actually read primary sources? You read his own?
Yeah, some. And I did a presentation on him to another philosophy club a couple years ago. But I've always been enchanted with some of his writings, and his life story is quite compelling. I mean, he was age 44 when he had his breakdown. So he did an amazing amount of writing, and really, arguably, one of the most influential philosophers of the last 200 years.
And he lived like another 10 years, right?
Yeah,
After breakdown, was he just like out of
state of
commission?
vegetation? Yeah,
oh, really? So
yeah.
just kind of hung on there for 10 more years.
Right, yeah, or so. I think he had his breakdown when he was 44, and he died when he was like 56.
Was it a mental collapse?
Yeah, it was a mental collapse. Well, and then some might say that it was untreated syphilis that caused him. Yeah, that had a big factor because it wasn't treated. Maybe something he contracted at a brothel 20 years prior. So that's one of the ideas, one of the possibilities.
There's so much that we can talk about the Superman, and we will, and the will to power. God is dead.
Yeah.
But give me kind of an overview of his philosophy, and what were what kind of a guy was he? So maybe even some biographical information. What should we know about Nietzsche?
He was very much a loner. And he lived by himself with his dog for many, many years. And he started out as an academic in German in philology, which is the study of languages and such. And he was the earliest tenured professor ever in the history of this university. He was like tenured at age 24. In fact, he was tenured. This is the 19th century, of course. He was tenured before he completed his PhD studies. Pretty amazing.
That's a good sign. Huh?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But
he was supposedly not a good lecturer. He could be impatient. He was so brilliant. Sometimes uber brilliance can be a bad thing. It can have negative influences, repercussions as far as dealing with other people and all that. And he struggled in that area. So he was basically lived a solitary life. He decided that teaching wasn't for him, and then he did get a small stipend, a small pension, but he only taught for 6 or 7 years, and then became a full-time philosopher. And wrote voluminously about a wide variety of areas, but primarily critique of morality, critique of what he would call the culture of the masses. He didn't hold the masses in very high regard. But
like people in general.
Yeah, people in general. He called it herd mentality.
Yeah,
he equated that with the herd mentality in contrast to the Uberman or the Ubermensch.
And he
Overman.
would include Christianity in that, right?
Yes,
he was.
Yes, he
although I believe his father was like a Lutheran pastor.
His father was a Lutheran minister.
Yeah.
So he was deeply involved, and he was very pious. He was sort of like Kant. He was very, very pious early in his youth. But I think when he became around 20 or 21, he rejected Christianity, although he did argue that Christ was a great, great man. In fact, he thought the perfect man would be Caesar with the heart of Christ. That would be the true Overman, this true Superman.
Yeah.
But he had horrible health issues during this time that he was writing. He had a panoply of various health issues. So he would go to the south of France, to Nice. He would try and go to some location where the weather would suit him a little bit better. So he was unlike Kant that stayed in the same village his whole life,
right.
basically. But he was a cultural critic. He was a poet. He was a philosopher. He was a Latin and Greek scholar. He was just a brilliant man. And he had a very interesting writing style. It was sort of a fusion of poetry and prose, a lot of allegories, a lot of metaphors, and some really
good
brilliant writing.
Yeah.
Very good writer. Unlike Kant, who you really can't. He's so hard to understand.
Right.
Daniel Kant.
But
it's rich in imagery. I mean, when thus spoke Zarathustra, there's images of snakes, and there's images of lions and eagles and
passionate
all these
writing.
Very passionate writing.
And didn't he have this whole Dionysius and kind of the
Napoleon?
What is that, like reason versus passion?
Passion, and he would argue that passion trumps reason. That one has to have a passion for life, to say yes to life, to say yes to all the exciting things that one can become. And so, he had some difficulties with the rationalists. He was very much an empiricist. He would reject a priori knowledge. But he just got involved in writing in all sorts of areas. Some of the areas that I think if we have a chance to cover, his critique of mass culture, his concept of perspectivism and truth, the master-slave morality, the will to power, of course, the Overman, and then the tie-in to Nazism, where some of that is well-founded, some of it, in my opinion, is not well-founded.
Well, let's take some of those. You mentioned a lot of things. Can we talk about the Uberman?
Sure.
You mentioned that, and that might be related to will to power, is it?
Or, yes.
Those are related. So let's talk about those two, maybe as together.
So with the Overman or Übermensch in German, Overman, he really thought of that person as being a law unto himself. Okay, he was always male, of course. He didn't have a high opinion of women or feminism, but he would refer to Napoleon, Goethe, some of the Borgia popes, and Caesar, of course. He didn't consider himself to be an Overman.
Oh, really?
No.
So,
But he was portraying the message of the Overman via Zarathustra, the protagonist, and thus spoke Zarathustra, which is really his masterpiece.
Did he lack a quality of the Overman? Is that what it was?
Well, he was in very poor health.
And
he, the Overman was out in society. It was out making a difference, and that was not what Nietzsche did. So Nietzsche would not argue that he's an Overman because he was focusing on his writings and such. But the Superman is the one who justifies the human race, in his opinion, and that the Overman will say yes to life, yes to the challenges of life, and strive to be, going back to the Greeks, having excellence in the whole area of the physical side of life, the mental side of life, the emotional side of life, and attaining excellence in all these areas to the point where you are influencing countless generations. Now Nietzsche was not a theist, but he would say that the Overman would have this mortality because his ideas and concepts and look at Napoleonic law. It's still in effect today. That those would have profound influences for generations and generations and generations to come.
And in that regard, Nietzsche, we're talking about
him today, and he's been gone
over 121 years after his death.
That's right. But
so
the superior man would be a man that would not be a product of a long evolution, but a man that arose, that was passionate, that had this strong intellect, strong body, and that he would forge ahead and create this Overman that can motivate and inspire people from here on out.
It seems like almost that, because he rejected Christianity of his parents.
Yep.
But that's kind of what people wanted Jesus to be. But Jesus comes along and said, "I came not to serve, just to be served, but to serve." And
blessed are the meek,
yeah,
and poor in spirit.
And Nietzsche's like, "Whoa!"
He totally denounced that.
Right. That's almost Jesus was almost the opposite.
Yes.
Of what.
Yes.
He allowed himself to be killed and crucified.
Right.
And it's just like, that doesn't fit the mold.
It doesn't. It doesn't fit the mold. Although he would categorize Christ as great in the sense that he forged his own path. He was very, very honest. He was virtuous. But then flipping the coin, Nietzsche would say that Jesus was the one that was promoting the masses. Masses, the herd mentality. He was promoting that herd mentality, turn the other cheek and all these things. And so then, it's like, always complicated when you delve into these philosophers, because in one way you can see it from one perspective, and another way you can see it at a different perspective. So he had different perspectives on Jesus Christ. But he would argue that life, this will to power, is always, and this ties into the Overman, is always the strong defeating the weak, the intelligent defeating the ignorant or the stupid, and that is how our society progresses.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we move forward from the barbarians to this point now where we have laws, we have a higher standard of living. And so, he saw there was a lot of good things out of war. Amazingly, that he saw there was a lot of, ability to become stronger and forge your power through war.
So no role for altruism, no role for compassion, helping the poor.
Right.
I don't know if you've studied Ayn Rand much.
Yes,
at all,
I have.
But is that? It almost sounds a little.
She was very much
Randian,
influenced by Nietzsche.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Nietzsche would say, apply these concepts to yourself.
Yeah.
These not only just trying to pull other people up, but try to apply these concepts to the self. But here's why he didn't like the pity, is that he wanted, instead of helping people, giving them pity and all this, is that's not going to help them.
Yeah.
They have to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps and learn. If you're saying you're denying that, you're denying something very, very important to that particular person.
Yeah.
And so when you give people things, then there's dependency that is a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
So he very much was opposed to the whole concept of pity, of altruism, because then you're taking away from them the ability to build themselves up, on their own.
Survival of the fittest.
Survival of the
sounds kind of
fittest.
Darwinian.
That's right.
The natural selection, maybe.
Right.
Let me. And I don't know if this relates or not, or if it's a good segue. The whole "God is dead," statement. I think, and you can tell me if you agree, that many people misinterpret what he meant by that. That's what I've heard. It wasn't as simple as just saying there's no God.
No,
right?
I don't think he was saying that. Although he was not a theist, what he was saying is that the development of values from God, that we need to forge our own values. The value structure put forth, whether it's the Quran or the Bible, or the Bhagavad Gita or whatever, that we need to create our own values. We create our own values, and they can't be tied to something that's been given to us, that's been passed on from one generation to another. And so he had more of a problems with Christianity, for example, than he did with Christ,
mm-hmm.
And how Christianity had evolved. Let's put it that way. So his goal was that pity and giving things to the poor was counterproductive. Just like when our country, he would say that when we give all this money to the these African countries, there's so much poverty. It creates this mentality of we're the masters and they're the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that we wanted to create a society where you didn't have this master-slave mentality.
Yeah, yeah. That's because it's not helping the slave, or
Right,
it's not,
it's not helping the slave. Yeah, right. So then you're dependent. So like we give people. It's just like the old story of teaching a man to fish rather than giving him a fish. They become dependent.
Yeah.
Maybe someone who's less intelligent. They become dependent, and then it affects them psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
That all I am is just a leech.
Yeah.
And so I think Nietzsche would be, and Nietzsche didn't like laws and regulations and rules and all that, but I think he might, if he were here today, he might say, well, the worst thing we can do is give them the money and all these different things, Medicaid and all that when they're adult. The best thing he might say would be, we need to develop a level playing field, so if we can help them very, very early in their life, give them the base, then there might be more of a level playing field. But he was not concerned about the masses.
Mm-hmm.
The Uberman was a law unto himself. He was focused on the great men of our society, and those great men are the ones that are going to propel our society forward.
Now, if there's a room of 30 people doing a project, typically it works best if you have one person in charge, and the other people kind of submit their will a little bit and kind of lead the people.
Right.
Now, did he really think that every single person, every man, could potentially achieve this Uberman? That almost seems like a rule for. So not everybody was cut out to be an Uberman.
Not everyone was cut out to be an Uberman,
including himself.
Right, including himself. Yeah. It was those with superior intellect, superior drive, superior bodies. The classic Greek models of the superior man. But he talked about the intelligence. Ruthlessness at times. They had their own set of rules. They should have their own set of rules. And he despised the whole Bentham approach of utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number of greatest happiness of the greatest number of good, for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So he despised that.
So the ones who were not, let's say, the disabled guy or the person who's mentally not that sharp, what would Nietzsche say? Just you are there to be trodden upon, or you just sorry? I mean, what's his message to these people?
I think his focus would be not to trod upon them so much as to ignore them, set them aside, focusing on building up your own potential for becoming a Superman, and he would say that the Uberman has their own values, and he rejected utilitarianism. He rejected Kant's categorical imperative. Mm-hmm. In his mind,
duty, right? Yeah.
What's that?
Based on duty.
Based on duty, and act in such a way that will it, so it's a universal value. So if you were to lie, then that means that everyone would constantly lie, and then the value of a promise and language itself would just deteriorate, right?
Yeah.
Or property values would cease to be if everyone stole.
Mm-hmm.
But he saw it in a different way. He not that he advocated stealing and lying by the Uberman, but that they operated on different values, and they should operate on different values.
Mm-hmm.
And propelling those people, having a society that allows those people to thrive and grow, is the best type of society.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and again, I think there's probably some element of truth to what he's talking about,
Mm-hmm.
but virtue is in the mean. Maybe some altruism, some of that, and then let's meet in the middle.
That's right.
Let me talk about some of his influences. I know Ludwig Feuerbach was an influence. Anybody else that he would have said that
influenced him?
That influenced him, and then we'll also talk about people he influenced.
Oh, well,
I
think Aristotle, Plato influenced him, of course. Schopenhauer. Although Schopenhauer just developed this whole will to live.
Yeah.
But he saw the will as being detrimental in many ways. And so, Schopenhauer was more like he saw beauty in the aesthetics, whereas Nietzsche totally rejected that and self-denial. And that the will, with Schopenhauer, the will could be something that causes pain and difficulties and heartaches and all that. Whereas Nietzsche saw the will as this powerful, élan vital force, behind people. And he saw it as that the will to power as something grand and poetic and ethereal. And so they saw those, in different ways. He was influenced by Kant, although he rejected a lot of what Kant had said. I mean, he rejected, so much of, the philosophers, and he saw really the ideal state as actually the pre-Socratics, some of the tragedies they wrote, and that in some ways he loves Socrates, but another way he didn't like Socrates. He liked Socrates in the fact that Socrates went his own path. He forged his own path with a focus on virtue and a focus on truth. But then he didn't like Socrates because Socrates was like focusing on, what does this word mean? What does that word mean? And sort of the minutiae of different things. Yeah. And Nietzsche was much more a man about, set reason aside and focus on your passions. Yeah. Focus on your senses and your passions. And so it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. It almost seems like the opposite of Buddhism, where Buddhism is kind of like, as I understand it, is trying to negate the passions, right? And so that you can reach this kind of nirvana.
That's right.
Which would be, I guess, pure reason, and you're not being fettered by the emotions, the passions. Which Nietzsche is saying, no, let's
go full bore on the passions, and that the passions of mankind is what has propelled the human race. Along with just the will to power.
Yeah, you mentioned. I think we mentioned a little bit before about Hitler, Nazism. My understanding was it Nietzsche's sister was a Nazi? But you seem to think that you don't think that he bore any responsibility for what happened in Germany, or what do you think?
I think as far as his influence, it's a mixed bag again. For one thing, Nietzsche was very much opposed to anti-Semitism. Yeah. In fact, he was almost like a philo-Semitic in that he saw great strength from the Jewish people in overcoming odds and overcoming persecution and achieving great things.
From the biblical narrative.
And moving forward, even to Europe at that time, because many of them had accomplished a lot of great things in areas of finance and science and such. So he was very much an anti-Semitic, and he thought that was one of the weaknesses of the German spirit, was being anti-Semitic. Then when he died, his sister eventually took care of him, and she was married to a very rabid anti-Semitic, and she became somewhat anti-Semitic, maybe not as much as he did. And so then she would cherry pick his writings in such a way, and the translation in such a way that focused on these goals of the Aryan race being the great race and all that, and Nietzsche talked about the great lions and such, and the blonde beast, and Hitler and Goebbels, Himmler, they saw the blonde beast as a caricature of Aryan supremacy. Mm-hmm. But he was just basically talking about a lion. But Nietzsche was also not a big individualist in a way. Is that the goal is to propel society forward, and that lines up exactly with what the Nazis were focused on. Focusing on the Volk, the people. The individual's not important.
Right.
And then they focused on his writings on war. That war was a way to propel society forward for advancements in a society, and so they gravitated to that concept as well. So it's sort of, you can see that in some ways they liked what they felt like he that the message he was making, he was moving forward, was one that they felt very, very comfortable with. But in some of his, his other writings, you can see why. You can see that he would have been felt it was abominable what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people, for example.
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that at all. In your categories that you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, there were a couple of things that you mentioned that I had never even heard of. Can you go through that list?
Well, we haven't talked about perspectivism.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means.
Okay, he was one of the forerunners of this. It's like Plato talked about the forms, that there's an objective reality out there. We just can't know. Yeah. Nietzsche would say, no, there's no objective reality. It's all based on one's perspective and the foreground. And so my perspective of these monitors is different from yours because I'm looking at it at a different angle that you're looking at from. And so all it is a perspective. And so he would say the first thing about that is that if you recognize that your perspective, that it's not the absolute truth, and there's no such thing as absolute knowledge. You look at it as, this is your own perspective. But if you try and say, but I recognize that that's all it is one perspective. Yeah. And so if you were to say, but I'm going to try and consider my own perspective, but I'm going to try and consider your perspective. I'm trying to see maybe a Buddhist perspective on this, maybe a Democrat's perspective, a Republican's perspective. And as you accumulate these perspectives, you might get a little bit closer to the truth. So it's sort of like, the old philosopher that said that I'm going to run from this point to that point, the edge of the table. But first I have to get halfway there, right? And then once I'm halfway there, then I get to get another halfway to the next point.
And you never get there.
But you're never going to get there, right?
You'll get real close.
You'll get very, very, very close. You're never going to get there.
Yeah.
But what Nietzsche would say is that as you take in more perspectives, and this is really his concept of pluralism, as you take in more perspectives, you're going to get a better cohesive feel about that particular topic.
But that almost sounds an antithesis of what you said before about the groupthink. He's with Uberman. He's the one person doing his own thing. Why would the Uberman want all these different perspectives? It seems like he's going with his.
And that's a very good point. I hadn't really thought about it from that way. But
that almost sounds like forming a committee to see what everybody thinks about something.
It's sort of like, Dave, when you start researching and study these philosophers, you find it's like, well, that kind of conflicts with what I saw read over here, and that kind of conflicts with that. It's like, human beings are just endlessly fascinating people, and in particular philosophers, in my opinion. And he did so much writing. You can find inconsistencies in what anybody would write. But he would not negate the need for the Uberman to take into account different perspectives. But at the same time, he would not be interested in any of the perspectives from the herd. The herd mentality. He would not be interested in anything like that. But he really crafted, and then out of all these perspectives, all these multitude of perspectives, then we can create values there. But his values, he would say, are not, his own perspective, his own values are not necessarily better than anyone else's. But the more we can take into account that, recognize that our perspective is just that is just one perspective, recognize the weakness of it, and then try to learn other perspectives about a complex issue, that's equally important. And so you can, and it's sort of like, he rejected systems, system like the categorical imperative. We talked about that. He rejected that, or the utilitarian principle, because he saw all these nuances and all these exceptions to these various rules. And so he would say that having a pluralistic perspective on these different things is very, very important. And that we get fixated on our own foreground knowledge, our own, and he also, even though he rejected a priori knowledge, he also recognized the real limitations of the senses. Even though he was an empiricist, he recognized that there's so many limitations there. And so
would that have I'm thinking of relativism, where some people would say there's an objective truth. Genocide is wrong under all circumstances, or
Right,
killing an innocent person is always wrong under all circumstances. A relativist might, or abortion is always wrong, or and a relativist would say, well, that's your perspective, and we can just agree to disagree, and we have to look at different perspectives.
Right.
Would that relate? Would he have been a relativist?
Oh yeah.
In a moral standpoint.
Yeah,
where
he would definitely been a relativist.
You and I can totally disagree on a fundamental moral belief, but we can both walk away saying we're right. I mean, would he say that?
Yeah. Well, and then I think Nietzsche would also say that, a little bit like Hume, that you have to be really, really careful in just assuming that your own perspective is the right perspective, and that we make errors in judgment. We think that we're almost infallible on these different issues, and so he would point out the fact that we can't always know these things, but we should be striving. We should be striving, using our powers of learning, which he considered a great virtue. And we should be striving for these things, but that he rejected any type of system because the system didn't allow for wiggle room. It didn't allow for exceptions. It didn't allow for those supermen that are out there. It didn't take that into account. So he rejected rules and regulations and systems that can shackle man. And I say man because that's all he never he didn't take into consideration women's unique abilities.
Did Superman, the comic character, come from Nietzsche?
It's possible.
At least the name.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, because Uberman would be translated
yeah.
into Superman, right? Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
As you look at 2021, when we're recording this, and the culture, we have a lot going on in the culture. Do you see Nietzsche's footprint pretty prominently in politics, the culture today? I tend to think that he has great influence right now.
He has great influence, and but I think not all of it. I mean, when people think about Nietzsche, they often have real negative thoughts about that. Rejection of culture, rejection of pity. Rejection of the masses, they don't really matter. And yet, he can be very inspirational as well, Dave, in the achieving to the utmost, despite your limitations, achieving to the utmost all you can do, and saying yes to life, saying yes to passion.
Like a Nike commercial,
when
you
that's
see
right. Just do it.
The people, pumping the weight and running,
That's right. Just do it.
Just do it. I mean, that's Nietzsche.
That's Nietzsche right there.
And most people would say that that's a good thing. People are achieving the.
And that the life is filled with opportunities. It's filled with excitement. It's filled with all these great things that we can do, that we can strive to do, and that he would say that. The whole concept of the Overman and overcoming these things, it's not so much to trample on others, it's to overcome the weaknesses in yourself. That would be more of his focus, overcoming the weakness, and not so much concern yourself with trampling others, but focus on the weaknesses of yourself and how you can achieve greatness within yourself. And so I find that to be inspirational, and to get involved in the fabric of life, get involved in the flow of life, and focus on all the great things that you may be able to achieve. And so his number one thing was passion. He was skeptical about too much rationality. He was skeptical about overthinking things. He was skeptical about getting involved in the minutiae of different things. And this was in spite of the fact that he had just horrible health throughout much of his whole life that was debilitating. And yet what he accomplished in writing, and he only wrote for about 25 years, but the breadth of his writings were pretty staggering.
Yeah, and I think most people, unlike some of these philosophers, most people have heard of Nietzsche.
Yeah,
I don't know
most people
that
have.
most people have heard of William
Heidegger.
Bockham or Heidegger.
Or
Nietzsche,
Bertie Russell.
Nietzsche, and that big old mustache didn't
Yeah,
hurt.
that's right. Yeah, that was very impressive mustache.
He had to look. Well, we're about out of time. This has been a really interesting conversation. I want to ask you a question. I think the answer to this question may be Nietzsche, but you're not allowed to say Nietzsche. I want to ask you about a philosopher, living or dead, for good or for bad, whom you think has great influence on 21st century culture. And you're not allowed to say Nietzsche because we've talked
We've
about
been
that.
talking about
Who else do you think looms large?
Well, as far as I would say Bertie Russell. He's
oh, really? Most people haven't even heard the name.
Polymath. He wrote about a wide variety of areas, but he also wrote about human happiness, and he was very much a skeptic, very much a critical thinker, in the same lines as Nietzsche, but saw a beauty in all these different areas of life, and sort of the synchronicity of these various areas and passions of life. And he was an activist. He just wasn't, writing about philosophy. He was very much opposed to the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
He was had a lot of problems with World War I. And very, very influential writers. Well, and he was very much influenced by Nietzsche and another great philosopher was Kant. I mean, just his ideas on what we know, and this juxtaposition of we can learn. We become who we are, not just on our senses, but this innate knowledge as well.
Yeah.
He was brilliant in that he sort of merged the two together, that those two worked in tandem, just like some of the later scientists would talk about how it's not just nature versus nurture, but that nature and nurture, they're constantly interacting with each other to form who we are.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just genetics alone, and it's not just environment, but our genetics and our environment are constantly interacting. And Kant saw the same thing 200 years before, or however long it was. He was an 18th century philosopher, as far as tried to wed empiricism with a rational approach.
He said Hume awoke him from his dogmatic slumber, right?
slumbers. That's right. Right.
That'll be our next interview. If you feel competent to talk about Kant, because I would love to pick your brain about him as well. Thank you so much. Really interesting, and I've learned so much about Nietzsche, and I hope you have as well. My guest has been Rob Olson, Dallas Philosophers Forum, philosophersforum.org. You can check out that website and maybe get involved in that organization very much. So thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Dave.
Also want to thank the wonderful young lady behind the scenes, my daughter, who is doing a lot of work. So thanks to Maura. And thank you for watching. If you have any questions, just put them below here on this video, and I'm sure Rob will be looking and he can answer directly. But thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.